All right, so here is the directions on how to do a lab formal write-up. Okay, so you're always going to want to put your name at the top, your lab number, the due date the lab is due. You won't need this heading. Okay, these are your directions. Each one of these headings will be in bold, underline, and put a colon. This is the format of the state required biology regents, so we're going to use the same exact format so you're familiar with it. All right, your title should tell what your experiment is studying. The effects of the independent variable on the dependent variable, just like how I taught you how to title a graph. You can center that and put that in the middle, underline it, make it bold. The rest of the heading should be on left justified, on the left side, with the colon and the underline. The hypothesis, what you think your results show. It must be in an if-then statement, okay? You don't have to have the words if and then, but look for that within the statement. Materials and method. Include a bulleted list of materials needed and a numbered step-by-step sentence form explanation of your methods. Also, in your methods, be sure to identify your independent variable, your control, and your dependent variable. Okay, so you can do a bulleted list and list the materials, and the rest should be in a paragraph. All the things we've been talking about this year on how to set up an experiment. Data collection. Okay, you can use a table. You want to present your data. Discussion and conclusion. Indicate whether or not your data support your hypothesis. Explain how your conclusion is supported by your data. So you want to go back and once looking at your data, tell us whether you accept or reject your hypothesis, whether you support it or not. Suggestions for improvement. Now these two, a lot of kids when they get to biology haven't done anything quite like this, but you want to think about it. How could you improve the experiment? Discuss reasons why your experiment may not have been a good one. What are some things you could do to make your results more reliable? State 3 other variables that you did not study which could have influenced your results in this lab. And then any suggestions for further research. State at least 2 other investigations that could be done to answer the questions related to this lab. Okay, so here are the formal write-up directions. Here's an example. I'm going to use that experiment that Reddy did when people used to think that living maggots came from dead meat. Okay, so title, the effects of open-closed container on maggot production. Again, you could title that in the center if you want and make it bold and underline, or you can put it to the left. Hypothesis, if meat is left in a closed jar, then the maggots won't appear on the meat. Methods and materials. So he listed everything. The following materials were needed. There's his bullet list. The following method was foul. Number 1, meat was placed in the 5 open jars and 5 closed jars. Number 2, flies were released and observations were made at the end of a week. 3, data collection entailed whether maggots appeared or not appeared on the meat after 1 week. The independent variable, what I control, was the open-closed lid. The dependent variable was the appearance of maggots. The results were compared and analyzed. So we've done the title, the hypothesis, methods, and material. Now we're on data collection. Okay, very simple. It was either an open-closed lid. Okay, kids will often put a result here. This is just your data. Now your discussion and conclusion. All of the jars with the open lids have maggots appeared on the meat, and all of the jars with closed lids did not have maggots on the meat. These results support the hypothesis that meat left in a closed lid jar would have maggots appear on them, thus helping to disprove the theory of spontaneous generation, the theory that living organisms can come from non-living organisms. The flies actually land on the meat and lay eggs, which hatch into the maggots. Okay, so I did talk about whether I supported or not the hypothesis. Next, suggestions for improvement. Variables that were not taken into account that could have affected the results of this experiment. Number 1, perhaps 1 week wasn't enough time. Number 2, the sample size could be increased. Number 3, perhaps the physical conditions of the flies were compromised. Suggestions for improvement. So this is the last part. Or suggestions for future research, sorry. Some further questions that arose from this experiment are, number 1, what would happen if we tried a similar experiment with worms and wood? And that one is true. They used to think worms came from wood because they would find them there. 2, what would happen if we tried a similar experiment with fleas from dust? The same thing with fleas. All right, so there's an example, and then you're going to get started on your first write-up.